Chapter 1. The silence before the surge whispered from the edge of the void, by a voice that once bore a name, now only shadow, only memory. Before the stars were mapped, before the Jedi sang their hymns of light, before Sith etched their truths in stone and blood, there was silence, not peace, not serenity, but the stillness of an unborn storm. The Force held its breath. A child was born, not in fire, not in thunder, but in frost and finance, among ledgers, greed, and breathless ambition. Megiddo was his cradle, a world of glass towers and frozen envy. The child came forth, not crying, but watching, eyes wide, ancient already, staring through mother, through walls, through time itself. He was not named for love, he was named for legacy. Ego demasks, but names are fragile things. They crack beneath power, they dissolve before destiny. That name, Ego, would soon be discarded like a malted husk, for he would come to be known by another title, a holier curse, a wound upon the Force itself. Darth Plagueis. The child's mind opened before it should. While others clung to warmth, he reached inward, and the Force answered not with light, but with whispers. Not all are born attuned. Fewer still are born listening, but this boy heard. Somethinga, humming, a rhythm beneath breath. He would later describe it as the heartbeat of death. He did not fear it, he studied it, while other children played. Ego watched dying animals with unblinking eyes. He dissected bugs not for cruelty but for comprehension. Where others prayed to distant gods, he prayed to silence, to that space between pulses, to the moment the breath ceases and something else begins. And the Force noticed him. The Jedi never came. Perhaps they felt him and turned away, or perhaps the Force itself, that ancient deceiver, chose to keep him hidden. Let him bloom unseen in darkness. He grew under the weight of legacy. Banking clan heirs do not laugh, do not stumble. They invest, calculate, and devour. Yet in this cold economy of flesh and credits, the boy kept his secret flame, a fascination, a hunger, not for power, but for continuance. Why must things end? Why must life wrinkle, collapse, extinguish? Why does the Force allow such waste? He asked these questions aloud once. His tutor grew pale. His mentor whispered of Jedi blasphemies. His father, indifferent to all things spiritual, merely said, "Because it does." That answer was unacceptable. The child began to seek, in forgotten databanks, in suppressed philosophies, in ancient texts traded on the black channels of Coruscant's underlayers. His mind a vault, his will iron. And then, one night, beneath Megiddo's ghostlight auroras, something answered, a voice. It did not name itself, it did not promise truth, but it showed him a memory not his own, of a world drowned in fire, of temples collapsing, in screams of sabers, not of light, but of hunger. The Sith, he saw them, felt them, and in them he found not glory, but freedom, not peace, but understanding. The Force was not a current to surrender to. It was a beast to cage, a storm too, harvest, a god to kill. That night he carved a symbol into his wrist, not with blade, but with thought, a mark only he could see, a vow. I will break the wheel of death. I will seize the pulse of the Force. I will make life. Kneel. He was no longer Ego, not truly. He had begun the shedding of form. He would become the architect of eternity. But eternity, is patient, and so he waited. He studied the failures of Sith before him. Revan, distracted by love. Nihilus, consumed by his own void. Bane, too rigid, too bound by rule. Plague would be different. He would endure. He would rewrite the rule, not of two, not of one, but of forever. He learned to mask himself in boardrooms, to kill with contracts, to dismantle empires with whispers. His Force presence buried so deep, even masters could not feel it without bleeding for it. Then came the first ritual. A small creature, a breath held too long, a death reversed, not by accident but by will. The Force shuddered. Somewhere in the Jedi Temple, a statue cracked without touch. Somewhere in the unknown regions, a virgins screamed in silence. He had done what none dared, and the galaxy did not yet know. The death itself had begun to weep. The first fracture had been made. The gate had opened a sliver, and from that sliver the future would bleed. The voice falls silent for a breathless moment, as if remembering pain or relishing it, and so the tale begins. But beware, seeker of truths, for what you are hearing is not history. It is a curse cast backward in time, a prophecy written in rot, a wound still bleeding. Listen closely, for what comes next is betrayal, and breathlessness, and the slow suffocation of destiny. Let the second surge begin. Chapter 2. The Crimson Labyrinth of Darth Tenebrest. The dead do not teach, but sometimes they shape. He came cloaked in light and shadow both, a master of masks. A moon, tall as prophecy, with skin stretched like parchment and eyes that burned with sterile calculation. He was called Darth Tenebrous, a name that bled through time like rust through water. He did not choose the boy with affection. He chose him with mathematics. He measured potential the way one measures tides or planetary orbits. The Force, too. Him was not sacred, nor profane. It was a formula, a pattern, a code to be bent, modeled, improved. And in the child called Higo, he saw an anomaly. He saw a cipher no Jedi could break. And so, in the stillness of a boardroom carved in durasteel and lies, he offered not a hand, but a contract, not a question, will you serve me, but a statement, you already do. Thus the apprenticeship began, not in temples, not in blood rites, but in laboratories buried beneath molten crust, where air was filtered, and screams were soundproofed. Here, Tenebrous taught not faith, but logic, not rage, but design. The dark side, he whispered, was not about hate. Hate is erratic, wasteful. The dark side is about focus, precision, adaptation, evolution. The Sith had failed, not for lack of strength, but for excess of feeling. You will not feel, Tenebrous said. You will calculate. And so Plagueis learned. He learned to graft kyber shards into bones and make them sing with pain. He learned to map midi-chlorians like constellations, tracking how they pulsed and shifted beneath desire, beneath fear, beneath faith. He learned how to lie without words, to kill without movement, to break a Jedi's mind with only a sentence. You were already forgotten. But there were things Tenebrous would not teach. He kept the sacred knowledge, the true rites, the deepest rituals, locked behind molecular encryption and cryptic mantras. He feared the boy. Or perhaps he hoped he would fail. He should have. Feared more, for even as Tenebrous spoke of control, Plagueis listened for weakness. He watched the way his master's eyes lingered. Too long on equations he could not solve. He saw the tremble in his fingers when experiments collapsed into unlife, and he heard, once, in the dead of starless night, his master weep just once. It was not sadness, it was despair, a whisper of mortality. That was when Plagueis knew, Tenebrous, master of logic, acolyte of design, was still bound by the one truth he could not overwrite. He would die, and death was not worthy of a Sith. Plagueis began his own experiments in secret. He isolated 4 signatures, drawing them from vermin, from prisoners, from even his own cells. He whispered to petri dishes, watched them breathe, then scream, then vanish. He began to understand, not fully, but enough to begin shaping the question of eternal life. Not preserving the flesh, but commanding the spark, Tenebrous noticed, or pretended not to. He grew colder, more secretive. He began to speak of succession. "You will take my place one day," he said once. "If you live long enough to understand me." Plagueis did not reply. He had already begun to calculate the moment. He knew the time of his master's death to the second. He knew how long it would take for the toxin to reach the lungs. He knew the last words Tenebrous would speak. He knew, but the force did not. It twisted, it resisted. The moment came, and the blade did not fall. Instead, Tenebrous collapsed in the lab, clutching his chest, not from Plagueis' hand, but from fate. A failed experiment, a ruptured spore, a miscalculation, but no death is accidental. No moment is meaningless. Plagueis knelt beside him, watched the breath slow, watched the eyes glaze, watched the legacy unravel, and then he did something no Sith had done before. He reached into his dying master, not to save, not to comfort, but to trap, using an incomplete ritual and a holocron shaped like a screaming face. Plagueis bound the essence of Tenebrous into a shattered kyber. Sliver dot, not alive, dot not dead, not free. His master would teach him still, but from within a prison of silence and madness. "You are not worthy of death," Plagueis whispered. "You will serve beyond breath." And so the new Sith Lord rose, not by murder, but by containment. Darth Plagueis, not chosen, not crowned, but calculated into being. He left the lab burning behind him, left the broken shell of Tenebrous' laboratory to sink into the planet's core, and he took with him the whispering crystal, a master's scream, trapped forever in the folds of the Force. From that day forward, he walked the galaxy not as heir, but as the algorithm of immortality. And still, the Force resisted, and still, it whispered, "You will create the destroyer of destiny." And Plagueis began to smile, softly, slowly, for the first time, for he liked that prophecy. He liked it very much. Chapter 3. The murder that echoes eternally. Not all who die are gone, not all who live are whole, and some murder without touching. There was no funeral, no tomb, no pyre, no ashes scattered into the void. For what was Darth Tenebrous to Plagueis, if not a riddle solved, a lock picked, an equation surpassed? The galaxy, so full of chatter and movement, did not even flinch. One moon vanished from the ledgers, another took his place, but within the quiet edges of the Force, a scream remained, thin, stretched across time like cracked glass, trapped, contained, the kyber shard that bore Tenebrous' essence pulsed like a wound. It did not shine, it bled. Soft red veins of hatred flickered within, whispering formulas, curses, names best forgotten, Plagueis did not discard it. He studied it. He made it speak in a vault far beneath Sojourn, surrounded by blackstone circuitry and force-gauged relics. Plagueis placed the shard upon a pedestal of null gravity. Around it, he carved rings, equations of death, spirals of rebirth, sigils drawn in powdered bone, and he waited hours, days, hours, days, until the crystal blinked. "You are a coward," it hissed, in a voice that sounded like shattered mirrors breathing. "You could not even kill me yourself." Plagueis did not flinch. He did not answer. He listened, because now, at last, the ritual was working. Tenebrous, bound beyond death, was no longer his master. He was a source, a database, an oracle, cursed to see what he could no longer change. The dead, when properly tortured, become honest through this spectral communion. Plagueis learned the patterns of Sith fallacy. He learned of Revan's weakness for duality, of Sidious's yet informed hunger, of the Jedi's unbreakable blindness. But, most importantly, he learned that death was stupid, messy, inefficient, not a wall, but a glitch in the Force's logic, a bug in its code. The solution: manipulate life from the root. Control the source, not the fruit. So Plagueis turned his mind to the impossible. He called it the grand design. He no longer sought to kill. He would create not children, not soldiers, but a life that did not answer to birth. A being without father, without flaw, conceived directly through the Force. A will born of will. And to do this, he needed the Force. To listen, not as a servant, but as a subject. He began his true experiments. He drained convicts of their midichlorians in sterile rooms. He injected clone embryos with pulsing darkside sigillus. He grew artificial fetuses in stasis chambers, murmuring Sith mantras to them while they dreamed in silence, only to watch them wither into ash the moment breath met flesh. Failure, again and again and again, and yet he felt closer. Something watched him now. Something resented him. The Force, that ancient liar, had begun to feel pressure. It pushed back. Dreams filled Plagueis' sleep, if it could be called sleep. Dreams of planets, giving birth to stillborn gods, of twin stars collapsing into each other, of a figure, faceless, standing in a field of Jedi bones, its hands empty, but its presence infinite. And once, deep in his laboratory, a voice not tenebrous whispered, "You will create the death of the Jedi." He wrote it down, burned it into steel, set it as the centerpiece of his prophecy war. His voice, now, was slower, his face thinner. He no longer ate for pleasure. He fed because the vessel required it. He no longer slept. He suspended himself. All breath was utility. All touch was experiment. He was not a man, not a moon, not a Sith. He was becoming a creature whose mind replaced time. He saw 1,000 futures, all poisoned, all bleeding from the same wound, mortality. But in each vision, he saw a child who was not born, a child who would be born. The child was flame. The child was prophecy. And it would not call him Father, but he would shape it. He would reach through time and will it into being. The final evolution, he did not name it yet. He only called it the One and the Shard. The crystal containing Tenebris began to crack. "You are tampering with ruin," it said. "Even the Force has its vengeance." Plagueis only smiled. "Then I will teach the Force to kneel." In this act, in this belief, he transcended the Sith Lords. Before him, not stronger, not crueler, not louder, but closer, closer to the truth. None dared speak aloud. The Force was never a gift, it was a disease, and he, the cure. Yet even as he thought it, somewhere far away on a dust-choked world of suns and slavery, a whisper began in the womb of a woman named Shmi, a whisper born of nothing, a whisper that should not have existed. And though Plagueis would not know it for years, his grandest experiment had already begun. But the Force, always watching, always rewriting, had its own prophecy, and prophecy is the cruelest of cages. Chapter 4: The Breathless. Signs of immortality. To command the Force is to breathe beneath its skin. To reshape it is to die and not return. Yet still he tried. He no longer called it death, not truly. Death was a crude name to final, too loud. What others called death, he called cessation of flow, loss of tension, dissolution of midichloric cohesion. He had dissected it, named its shapes, mapped its rhythms, and in doing so, Darth Plagueis began to believe that mortality was nothing more than a glitch, a misfire in the cosmic web, a bug in the song of the Force, a thing to be corrected. And so he built a sanctum far beneath the molten rock of Sojourn's forgotten moons, deeper than light, deeper than censor. In chambers warded by Sith runes and silence, he forged a cathedral of failure, a place not to pray, but to interfere. Every wall was a monitor, every console was a mouthpiece to creation. The air itself was filtered to prevent even bacteria from interrupting the sacred work. He allowed no droids, no witnesses, only pain, only breath, only him. He called it the Null Vault, and there he began again. The ritual started small, a cell drawn from a dying woman, a spark of life transferred to a nutrient gel, a fetal form, pressed into existence by sheer will. Failure then, a captured Jedi, comatose from battle, drained, dissected. His midichlorians counted, separated, fused with Plagueis' own failure. Then, a clone, gestated in spiraling nutrient tanks, conditioned, not for thought, but for reception. Plagueis entered trance, called the Force inward, willed the body to ignite failure again, again, again. His subjects decayed, some wept blood before collapsing, others screamed with voices not their own, as if something from elsewhere had briefly worn their flesh. One even laughed before crumbling, and yet Plagueis did not stop. Each experiment taught him more. Each failure made the shape clearer, like a sculptor removing stone, not building form, but uncovering it. What he sought was not birth, it was genesis. He was not creating a being, he was creating a will, a conscious fragment of the Force, shaped by Sith intent, guided by unnatural command, formed not in a womb, but in calculation. He did not care for shape, he did not care for beauty, he cared for obedience. The midichlorians would not serve, they must be bound. He discovered that their activity could be guided, not by seduction, as the Jedi believed, nor by rage, as the Sith practiced, but by something deeper, by fear. When he filled the Null Vault with unbearable dread, when he induced terror so total it became silent, the cells responded. They listened, they bent, not perfectly, not yet, but the whisper was growing louder. He began to sense something emerging, something watching back. He would meditate for hours in liquid trance, his body suspended in null-grav tanks, while his consciousness drifted among spiraling chromosomal Pathways, his spirit threading through veins of force, potential, he saw. Forms not yet real, but promising. One shape, in particular, returned again and again, a child, small, shimmering, untouched by lineage, untouched by time. Its face was hidden, its aura was blinding. He asked it once in trance, "What are you?" And it replied, "I am the consequence." Plagueis awoke, screaming. It was the only time he allowed his voice to break. The shard containing, tenebrous, now almost inert, pulsed once, mocking him. "You are not making life," it rasped. "You are unmaking the force." Plagueis did not answer. He agreed. It was the force that was flawed, not him. He believed now, fully, that he had surpassed every Sith before him. They had sought power, he sought control. They had burned temples. He would rewrite the source of life itself. They had ruled empires. He would eliminate death, and if that required the Force to suffer, so be it. The Force had never wept for him. It had never lifted the chains from his birth. Why should he honor it? He would break its rhythm, unbind its cycles, command it like a machine, and from that machine, the future would be born. But not yet, not here. Something was missing, a variable, a breach. He needed a vector, a mask, a presence in the open. He needed a pawn. Or no, something more, a partner, someone to shape the visible world while he reshaped the underlying one. And so, for the first time in decades, Plagueis left his sanctum. He walked among flesh again. He smelled the rot of politics, the stench of senatorial greed, and in that mire, he saw a boy, smiling too sharply, speaking too sweetly, eyes like knives behind, charm palpitating, and Plagueis felt it, not in his bones, but in the force itself, the resonance, the note that fit the chord. "This one," he whispered, "this one will rule the lie, while I master the truth." He would take the galaxy, he would take the force, and he would, in time, take life itself, but far, far away, in the womb of a slave woman, a cell divided without touch, a heartbeat formed with no father, a child stirred beneath stars that did not care, and the force trembled. Chapter 5. The acquisition of Bane's cursed. To inherit a rule is to wear a shackle. To understand it is to melt it into a blade. He no longer feared the archives of the dead. He sought them. He devoured them. Beneath the storm-carved cliffs of Pragueis, buried under obsidian cathedrals veined with screaming Kyber, Plagueis unearthed what remained of Darth Bane's legacy. Not just writings, not just relics, but something. Preserveda vault, untouched by Jedi light, shielded by force, mazes older than empires, holding within it the doctrine that had shaped the Sith for 1,000 years, the rule of two, one master, one apprentice, no more, no less. The doctrine was elegant, efficient, ruthless, but it was still a reaction, born not of power, but of fear. Bane had seen the Sith destroy themselves, and he had caged them in secrecy. A wise strategy for the weak. Plagueis read Bane's writings as a surgeon reads a failed diagnosis, not with reverence, but with pity. The rule was not wrong. It was small. Where Bane saw survival, Plagueis saw opportunity. Where Bane saw a lineage of darkness, Plagueis saw a system to be infected, silently, patiently, with thought like venom. The rule had kept the Sith alive. Plagueis would make them immortal, and so he began to rewrite it. Not on stone, not in ink, but in living minds. He built networks, not of apprentices, but of instruments. Bankers who unknowingly laundered his wealth. Scientists who explored boundaries they believed were theirs. Politicians whose campaigns were whispered into place from across star systems. And above all, he watched the boy, the apprentice he had yet to name, palpitized, sharp of tongue, hollow of heart, a creature of masks and mirrors. Plagueis found him in Naboo, surrounded by silk and smiles, already a schemer, already dangerous. He made no threats. He offered no temptation. He simply asked, "Would you like to learn how to rule the galaxy?" And the boy smiled. Thus, the next movement in the grand design began. He did not name Palpatine as apprentice. Not at first. He trained him through riddles, through implication, through deliberate silence. He let the boy chase knowledge, and as Palpatine devoured the ancient texts, Malak, Korriban, Bane, Refine, even the heretical scrolls of Sin, Plagueis watched the hunger grow, watched the face grow colder, watched and planned. He told the boy, "You will not take the name of Darth until your mind no longer requires it." The apprentice asked what that meant. Plagueis said, "Names are for creatures who fear being forgotten." And still, the rule watched. From its tomb, the spirit of Bane, if such things linger, surely raged. For here was a Sith who did not kneel, who did not pass the flame, but who sought to rewrite the fire itself, and the Force began to stir in resistance on Coruscant. Jedi Masters began to dream of red suns and empty cradles. On Dantwan, the Kyber caves pulsed out of rhythm, as if choking. On Mustafar, the magma sang songs not heard in millennia. The balance was tipping, not toward darkness, not toward light, but toward something unwritten, a storm without name, and far away. In the deserts of Tatooine, a child looked to the stars, a slave, unborn, a father, unblessed by future. And yet, the sand beneath his feet whispered, the word chosen. Plagueis, in trance, saw the child only as a blur, not yet formed, not yet real, but inevitable, and he smiled, not with joy, but with satisfaction. The grand design was unfolding, and Bane's rule, his prison of secrecy, was now a ladder, a stepping stone into a future where only Plagueis would remain, not in body, but in code, in will, in breathless, undying mastery. He called it not a plan, but a correction, and still, the voice of Tenebris faint flickering within, his crystal groaned, "You are opening a gate that will never close." Plagueis whispered in reply, "Good." Chapter 6. The Senator's masked power wears many faces, but the most dangerous is the one that smiles, bows, and votes. He had chosen well. Palpatine, son of Naboo, was everything the Republic loved. Polite, articulate, clean. His gaze never lingered too long, his voice never rose too high, and his hands never stained, not with ink, not with blood. But Darth Plagueis saw through it all, because he had built the boy, not from flesh, not from code, but from belief, carefully placed, like bricks in a temple. He whispered doubt into the apprentice's innocence, then replaced that doubt with doctrine. He uncoiled power around Palpatine like a python, not to squeeze, but to teach how to constrict. The boy learnt fast. By the age of 30, Palpatine knew more about the Republic's failures than its founders. He understood that laws were clay, that ethics were illusions, that control was not taken by war, but by waiting. Plagueis taught him patience, and more dangerously, He taught him vision. But Plagueis had one mistake left in him. He believed Palpatine would remain his, that the boy's rise would be Plagueis' rise, that his apprentice would carry the grand design like a vessel, a blade guided by an unseen hand. But Sith blades often cut their wielders. Still, for now, the mask held. Palpatine played the game. He entered the Senate. He watched, he flattered, he listened, and with Plagueis whispering through secure channels, cloaked in corporate fronts and black-masked lobbyists, they began to shape the galaxy. They engineered scarcity. They stirred border conflicts. They bought silence in 10,000 languages. Plagueis, the unseen architect. Palpatine, the smiling chisel. The galaxy did not feel itself changing, because the change was slow, measured, surgical. A senator here, a policy there, an economic shift, a war whispered into a back room before it ever reached a battlefield. Meanwhile, in the sanctum, Plagueis continued his work on life. He had not abandoned the grand design. Now, more than ever, he believed it must be completed. Because now he had found the final variable, time. His apprentice would soon rule, and he would rule forever, not as emperor, but as host. For Plagueis had no intention of dying. He would bind his consciousness, not to holocrons, not to crystals, but to life itself, to Palpatine, not as a parasite, not as a ghost, but as will-infused, permanent, dominant. He did not tell the apprentice this. He did not need to. The apprentice still smiled when told to smile, still bowed when ordered. But Plagueis had begun to notice something new. A stillness, a silence. Palpatine no longer asked questions. He only observed. He absorbed. And behind his eyes, something plotted. Still, Plagueis believed himself in control. And perhaps, for a time, he was. They orchestrated the rise of the Trade Federation's influence. They seeded the beginnings of discontent on Naboo. They traced the Chancellor's declining health like a countdown. Everything was in motion. Soon, Palpatine would become Supreme Chancellor, and soon after, he would become host, the final container, for Plagueis' eternal presence. But in the shadows, far from Coruscant, far from Naboo, a whisper stirred on Tatooine, a boy, born not of man, touched not by ritual, a raw force presence, so pure, so loud, it screamed across the galaxy. The chosen one. Plagueis sensed him, only faintly, a flicker in the dark, but undeniable, a force-born anomaly, a living echo of the grand design, or worse, its corruption. He said nothing of this to Palpatine, not yet. There was time, there was always time, but something in the boy's presence unnerved him, not because it was powerful, but because it was unclaimed. No lineage, no allegiance, a blank slate, and the Force, ancient, coiling, wrathful, had begun to favor it. Plagueis felt the tilt, just a little, just enough. He returned to his sanctum. He recalculated the grand design, and for the first time in decades, he adjusted the outcome. If I cannot live through the apprentice, he whispered, perhaps I will live through the one. And far away, beneath twin suns, a child raced through sand, laughing, unaware that gods and monsters now dreamed of his soul. Chapter 7. The Night of the Thousand. Icewan power grows to quiet, even shadows start to watch. And when too many watch, betrayal becomes inevitable. It began with a tremor, not in the Force, but in patterns. Plagueis saw it first in the financial shifts, silent movements of credits through non-republic ledgers, trails wiped with surgical precision. Then came the whispers from Bothan spies he never employed, from smugglers who should not know his name. Then the silence. Contacts that once obeyed with mechanical obedience stopped answering. Systems once loyal to the unseen hand suddenly broke rank, not in rebellion, but in numbness. It was as if something else had begun to lead them, not openly, but from behind a new curtain. He returned to his vault, recalculated the probability matrices. The outcome repeated itself, like static in a flawless signal. The apprentice has deviated. Palpatine. His apprentice, his chosen, was acting independently. Plagueis was not angered. He did not feel anger anymore. He felt something colder. Inefficiency. He confronted him, not as master, but as shadow. He appeared in the senator's private quarters during a security blackout so quiet it left no echo. The guards forgot they had ever stood watch. Your plans, Plagueis said in a voice that did not travel, are not aligned. Palpatine did not deny it. He simply smiled. No, he said, pouring himself wine. They are not. It was not. Defiance it was. Inevitability. Plagueis observed the glass, watched the swirl, the vibration of it. No poison, no trap, only certainty that was more dangerous. And so Plagueis asked the question that hovered between master and student, death and dynasty. Do you believe you have surpassed me? Palpatine turned, eyes aglow like dying stars, and replied, no. Then, after a beat, I believe I have absorbed you. Plagueis did not move, for that was the moment he had long prepared for. The confrontation all Sith lines demand. He stepped forward. No sabers, no lightning, only presence, only will. But Palpatine did not flinch. Instead, he whispered something so small the air barely remembered it. And then Plagueis understood this confrontation was not happening. It had already happened. Elsewhere, in pieces, across months, 1,000 moments, 1,000 cuts, 1,000 eyes. Plagueis felt it all at once. Security feeds rerouted, voice prints forged, holocron access mimicked his own genetic code, used without his knowing, and somewhere, deep within the null vault, one of his clones had been activated. He had not given the order. You have used my own science, he said, softly. Of course, Palpatine replied, smiling. You taught it to me. And that was when Plagueis felt the shift. It did not begin in his body. It began in the Force. A dissonance, a severing. Something had cut him off, not fully, but enough, like a scream underwater. His connection remained, but muted. Blurred, Palpatine had altered his flow. I am not your host, the apprentice said. I am your successor. And Plagueis understood. He had overreached. He had tried to use Palpatine as a vessel, but vessels leak that, especially when they learn to carry their own flame. Still, he was not defeated. He had contingencies, fail-safes. He closed his eyes, reached out to the emergency triggers beneath Sojourn Dot, called to the symbiote codes, embedded in Palpatine's bloodstream, but the triggers did not respond. Silence. I already found them, Palpatine said, reading his stillness. Plagueis opened his eyes. The apprentice stood now beside him, controlled, but behind him, in the Force. Something moved, a void, a gap where future once lived, a space where the Force had recoiled. The Force was not with Plagueis anymore. It was watching, and it was curious. He had broken its rhythm. Now the rhythm had chosen another, Still, he did not kneel. Still, he did not beg. He simply said, "You are not the end of my work." Palpatine's smile turned cruel. "No," he replied, "but I am the one who makes it obsolete." And in the next moment, between heartbeats, between breaths, the scream began, but not from Plagueis, from the Force itself. A soundless rupture, a rebirth, a transfer. The apprentice did not kill him with blade or lightning. He killed him by replacing him. Plagueis collapsed not into death, but into irrelevance. And as the galaxy turned, unknowing, unblinking, far away on Tatooine, a boy stood before a Jedi and spoke his name, Anakin, and the Force, at last, inhaled. Chapter 8. The Whisper That Becomes a War. Not all wars begin with weapons. Some begin with wonder, some with prophecy, and some with the birth of a boy the Force did not choose, but could not escape. He was small, too small to matter, a child with sand in his eyes, grease on his fingers, and chains on his ankle. But the Force trembled around him, like it had been tricked, like it had been forced to give something it had no wish to give. The Jedi called him Anakin Skywalker, a slave's son, a nobody, but to the Force he was something more, a wound, a challenge, a paradox wrapped in prophecy. The Jedi whispered of the Chosen One, a being who would bring balance, whatever that meant, but the Force did not whisper, it waited for. Though this child smiled, and helped, and flew, he did not yet understand what he was. But Palpatine did. Palpatine watched Dot from afar. At first Dot, then closer still. The moment he laid eyes on the boy during the Naboo crisis, he felt it, not recognition but echo, as if he had once dreamed of this face, or shaped it in his sleep. He did not know Plagueis had spoken of the grand design of Force-born creation, of immortality drawn from will, but Palpatine had never seen proof, not until now. Now, there stood the proof, living, breathing, 8 years old. The apprentice had become master. But the grand design had lived on. Palpatine smiled. He did not mourn Plagueis. He did not fear the child. He saw the future, and so he did what he always did. He watched. He let the Jedi take the boy, train him, love him. He let them bind themselves to a child they did not understand. Because to Palpatine, love was a blade, and the Jedi had just handed him the hilt. Meanwhile, the galaxy spun toward fracture. Palpatine pushed gently, only gently. A taxation here, a corruption there. He fed the Trade Federation's hunger. He encouraged the Separatists' whispers. And the Republic staggered. It did not see its decay, because it had been taught to believe in peace, and peace is the most fragile illusion of all. The Jedi Council sensed darkness rising, but they looked in the wrong direction. They peered into the outer rim, into Dooku, into shadows, never into the Senate, never into the Chancellor, and certainly never into the boy. And so the stage was set. Palpatine did not need to start a war. He needed only to prepare the galaxy to accept one. He found systems ready to secede. He found voices ready to scream. He funded both sides, quietly, completely, and in the darkness he smiled, because the Jedi had helped him. They had brought him the Chosen One. They had handed him their future, gift-wrapped in robes and confusion. Anakin grew quickly, too quickly. Power bloomed in him like fire through dry wood. He learned not with curiosity, but with hunger. He won battles before he understood strategy. He obeyed, but with questions behind his eyes. Why can't I love? Why? must I serve? Why does the council not trust me? Palpatine listened to those questions and answered none of them. Instead, he fed them. You are different, he told the boy. You are destined. They fear what you could become. Anakin believed him. Not completely, not yet. But the seeds were there. Seeds watered by war, the clone. Wars began not with a roar, but with a murmur. An assassination attempt, a vote, a decision no one truly understood, and suddenly the Jedi were generals, the Republic was an army, and the boy became a weapon. But the Force remained uncertain. This was not its design, or was it? And it'd been tricked, twisted. Was this balance, or imbalance, made manifest? No one knew, because prophecy is a mirror made of dust. And now the dust began to rise. On Camino, clone troopers marched to drums of war. On Geonosis, blades ignited under crimson skies, and in the Chancellor's office, the architect watched, still smiling, still waiting for Anakin to fail or to rise. Either would serve him, because when the war began, it did not matter who won. What mattered was who would stand at the end, and far beneath Coruscant, in a sealed vault, a spark of Plagueis' essence blinked once within its crystal. Not awake, not alive, but remembering. Chapter 9. The war that fed the flame the galaxy burned. The Jedi bled, and in the center stood a boy, no longer guided by stars, but by wounds too deep to heal. The clone wars did not end. They pulsed, spilled. Endlessly, every planet that was liberated fell into silence again. Every victory bled into new resistance, and every Jedi sent to lead returned colder or not at all. But the boy, Anakin Skywalker, he thrived. He grew into legend. They said he could fly anything, that he turned battles by instinct, that even the Force bent toward him when the odds collapsed. But beneath the glory, something cracked because the Force spoke to him, and it did not always speak kindly. Sometimes it screamed. At night, Anakin saw visions of flame, of sand turned to bone, of Padme dying with no name on her lips, and in the day, the council gave him praise with cold hands. Well done, Knight Skywalker, but not trust, not a seat, not truth they held. Him at a distance, too powerful to deny, too unpredictable to embrace. And Palpatine watched. He saw the divide widening. He whispered comfort. You are the only one who can end this war. You are more than they allow you to be. They want control. I offer freedom. Anakin listened. Not because he believed it, but because no one else said it. And the war fed his pain. Every death he witnessed made the world dimmer. Every soldier who called him general reminded him of what the Jedi had become. Colon tools, warriors in a war they had not started. Fighting for a republic they no longer understood. And yet they obeyed, even as their temples cracked, even as their numbers thinned. Obedience was all they had left. Except for Anakin, he began to choose differently. Small things. At first, a prisoner spared against orders, a mission altered mid-flight. Then, larger, he executed a warlord who had surrendered. He struck down an unarmed separatist leader. He began to hide his choices from Obi-Wan, and when asked why, he only said, because it was necessary. The Force twisted around him, not recoiling, not rejecting, but waiting. Watching, because this was not the path of Jedi, nor of Sith. This was a third path. Fracture and fractures spread. The war made him a symbol, a weapon, a myth. But myths are not allowed to grieve. He could not weep for the children lost. He could not cry for the cities burned. He could not speak of the dreams of her Padma, secretly his wife, silently his last tether to innocence. She smiled in public, a senator with ideals, but in shadow she begged him to leave. Come away, the war will never end. But he could not. He had seen the future, a future where she screamed, a future where she died. And so the war continued, not just in the stars, but in him, a fire beneath the flesh, fed by fear, by secrecy, by love. And Palpatine knew. He saw the heat. He fanned it gently. There are powers the Jedi forbid, powers that could save her. Anakin said nothing, but his silence was not refusal. It was hope, hope that somewhere, someone could teach him to stop what was coming. And so the war burned brighter. Whole systems vanished into Ashdot clone troopers, obeyed without blinking, and the Jedi Council began to sense it. Something is wrong with the Chosen One, but they did not act. They debated. And in their hesitation, Palpatine pressed the final piece into place. He declared emergency powers. He extended the war by design. And when whispers rose that he might never step down, he smiled, because the Jedi were too noble to remove him, too bound by rule to betray. But Anakin was learning that betrayal and mercy can sometimes wear the same face. Far away in the shadows of a temple, a Padawan asked, "Master, why do the clones never question us?" And the Jedi did not know, because the war had not only fed the flame, it had set the stage, and beneath it all, the Force held its breath. One move remained, and it would be made in the dark. Chapter 10. The betrayal scripted in light the Jedi sought. Truth through clarity. But clarity in the hands of a Sith becomes a weapon, and the brightest temple falls when it forgets to watch its own shadow. The Jedi Temple rose above Coruscant like a mountain carved from discipline, tall, tranquil, untouched by storm. But inside, the cracks had already formed. The Council had grown still, not in peace, but in paralysis. They felt the darkness rising, yes, but they did not understand it. They sensed shadow in every corner, except the one in plain sight, Chancellor Palpatine, their ally, their old friend, the man who had led them through war, the man who spoke kindly, bowed politely, and smiled. Always smiled. They could not imagine that he was the storm, only master. Windu dared name it aloud. He is gathering too much power. If he does not step down, but even he hesitated, because to act without proof would make the Jedi traitors to the Republic, and that was the one sin they feared above all, becoming what they swore to fight. So they waited, and waiting was exactly what Palpatine needed, because Anakin was no longer waiting. He was watching the Council exclude him, watching his mentor rise beyond them, watching his visions of Padme's death grow louder, clearer, more real. Each night, her screams came sooner. Each morning, her heartbeats seemed fainter. He begged the Council for more power, more insight. They denied him. Let go of attachment, they said. Trust the will of the Force. But how could he, when the Force had never once explained itself, when it offered visions, but no answers? Palpatine offered answers. There are secrets the Jedi fear. There is a way to stop what you have seen, but you must be strong enough to take it. Anakin trembled, not with fear, but with choice. He still believed in the Jedi. He still loved Padma. He still hoped for peace, but he also knew he could no longer protect all three, and so, when the council finally ordered him to spy on Palpatine, to betray the man he saw as a second father, the fracture became a fault line. He obeyed, but, in doing so, he betrayed himself. Palpatine sensed it instantly. He invited the boy closer, told him of legends, of Darth Plagueis, of unnatural life, of Sith knowledge too powerful for the Jedi to allow, and when Anakin whispered, "Is it possible to learn this power?" the Chancellor replied, "Not from a Jedi." That was the final moment of choice, the final breath before devotion twisted into desperation. But still, not yet, not quite. Anakin ran to the council, told them the truth. The Chancellor is the Sith Lord, and they believed. Too late, Mace Windu gathered 3 Jedi Masters. He went to arrest the Chancellor, and Anakin waited, torn, trembling, and when Windu stood above Palpatine, saber-raised, eyes full of righteous fire, Anakin made his choice. He did not think of peace. He did not think of justice. He thought of Adem, acute, and he struck. A single blow, a Jedi Master fell, and the galaxy shattered. Palpatine rose, lightning dripping from his fingers, and Anakin fell too. His knees. What have I done? But it was too late for regret. Palpatine placed a hand upon his shoulder. "You are fulfilling your destiny, Anakin. Become my apprentice." And the boy who had once flown Padrazes in sand became a blade. A name reborn in fire. Darth Vader. He did not rise as a man. He rose as a warning. And, in the Force, something howled, far away, in hidden places. Jedi screamed in confusion as order. 66 was whispered into clone veins, and 1,000 sabers fell silent, because betrayal had not come from the outside. It had come from within, from light, scripted, whispered, promised, and now paid in full. The galaxy turned red, and the temple began to burn. Chapter 11. The silence that followed the screams the Jedi did not fall in fire. They fell in silence, not because they were weak, but because the war had taught them not to scream when it came. Coruscant was quiet, too quiet. The temple stood smoking, its spires fractured but not collapsed, like bones left standing long after the flesh had rotted away. The Senate cheered. The Republic rejoiced. They called it a victory against treason, but the Force wept in corridors where children once laughed. Now only footsteps echoed, heavy, cold, deliberate. Darth Vader moved through them like memory made real. No longer the boy, no longer the Jedi, only the flame that remained. He had obeyed the final command. He had entered the Jedi Temple. He had looked into the eyes of younglings, not with cruelty, not even with rage, but with purpose. Because he believed the lie. He believed he was saving them, saving Padme, saving the Republic, saving the future from the chaos of Jedi fear. And so he ended them, one by one. No hate, no hesitation, only silence. The kind of silence that follows prophecy's death. Outside, clone battalions marched to a war that was already won. Across the stars, Jedi were cut down in forests, deserts, oceans, not in battle, but in ambush, in betrayal. Obi-Wan barely survived. Yoda escaped, with scars not on his body, but on his belief, and the galaxy, once guarded by light, now tilted into shadow. Palpatine named himself Emperor, and there were no protests, no uprisings, only applause, because the galaxy was tired, tired of war, tired of Jedi, tired of questions, and Palpatine had offered them a truth so simple it required no thought: security. But the Force was not done. It cannot be done. It does not forget. And deep within the Force, in a place without time, where echoes become shape, a new silence formed. Padme Amidala, Queen of Sorrow, gave birth on a moon hidden from empire. Eyes. One child cried, then another. Twins, born of pain, born of prophecy, born of him, Anakin Skywalker's blood. One sent to the desert, one to the stars. Hope split in two. Podman died without anger, without accusations, only sorrow. Her final words, like a whisper to the Force itself: there is still good in him. But the man she loved no longer heard. He had been reborn, burned, sealed inside the armor, a machine shaped by hate, by regret, by fire. Darth Vader. Yet even now, even in silence, the Force refused to choose. It trembled between what was and what might yet be it. It remembered balance, not as peace, but as completion, and something was missing. A chord not yet struck, a light not yet lit, not to destroy Vader, but to understand him, for the Force does not deal in enemies. It deals in reflection, and somewhere, on a twin-sunned world of sand, a boy looked to the stars with his father's eyes, unaware that his destiny was not to destroy the Sith, but to remind the galaxy that even in silence, a voice may rise. Chapter 12. The voice that dared to speak his name. Names are power. To speak a dead name is to awaken memory. To speak a Sith's name is to summon the storm he left behind. His name had vanished from records, erased from Jedi scrolls, struck from archives, unspoken in public. Anakin Skywalker no longer existed. In his place, Darth Vader, the Blade, the Shadow, the Enforcer. But the Force remembers what data cannot, and the Force began to whisper again, not in the halls of temples, not in the minds of masters, but in the quiet breath of a child. Raised among sand. Luke, he did not know what he was. He knew only dust, work, moisture farms, stern uncles and dry suns. But at night, the stars called to him, not with sound, but with memory that was not his. He dreamt of ships he'd never seen. He moved things without touching, and he felt deeply that he had been waiting for what? He didn't know, but the galaxy was no longer quiet. The Empire ruled. Its grip was strong, but even steel corrodes. Rebellions stirred, not coordinated, not yet strong, but angry, and anger in the hands of the oppressed becomes hope. Leia Organa, flame daughter of Alderaan, smuggled information in royal vessels. Bail Organa whispered in the Senate while preparing for war, and Obi-Wan Kenobi watched from the shadows of Tatooine. He watched the boy, not as Jedi, not as master, but as penance. Every day he saw Anakin in Luke's eyes, and every night he asked the Force, will he fall as his father did? The Force did not answer because Luke was not a repeat. He was a response. A child born not of prophecy, but of ashes. And one day when fate struck quickly with troopers, with secrets, with a droid that carried hope, Luke was pulled into the current. He found Kenobi. He found the saber once held by a man called Anakin, and he asked the question that broke the silence. Who was my father? Kenobi hesitated. He lied, softly, almost kindly. He was a great Jedi, betrayed and murdered by Darth Vader. It was not the whole truth, but it was all he could offer, because to speak Anakin's name was to bleed. Still, the Force stirred because Luke had taken the first step, not in battle, but in seeking, and the galaxy tilted again. The Death Star rose, a station of fear, of finality, but it was not unbreakable, because hope, once whispered, spreads, and the Force is patient. It waited as Luke boarded the Falcon, waited as he found Leia, waited as he flew into war. And when Obi-Wan faced Vader for the final time, the Force watched. Two old flames. One flickering, one encased in armor. Obi-Wan did not scream, he did not weep, he simply became light, and Vader felt something, not victory, not peace, but a tremor, something old, something once his. And Luke felt it too, not just grief, but connection, a thread, a shadow beneath the armor, a name beneath the mask, a question left unanswered. Who was Anakin, and what had he become? The galaxy did not know, but the Force remembered. Chapter 13. The mask that would not crack. Some masks hide faces, others hold them together. And behind this one, not even the man knows if he still lives. He was legend now. Darth Vader, the Emperor's right hand, the walking death, the iron will of the Empire made flesh. His breathing alone silenced rooms. His shadow emptied corridors. His arrival ended lives. He no longer needed rage. He was rage. But beneath the armor, beneath the hiss of breath, the hum of servos, the echo of machinery, there was still something else, not a name, not a thought, but a pressure, a whisper, hollow. He had not spoken of Padam in years. Not aloud, but the name burned like a coal he could not discard. Sometimes, in the silence between star systems, he would stand at the VIEWPORT. And for a second he would forget who he was, forget what he had done. But the Force always reminded him. It would show him a sandstorm, a child spinning through Tatooine skies, a saber igniting in blue, a voice shouting, "Master." It was not mercy, it was memory, used as punishment, and Vader welcomed it, because pain was the only thing he could still feel. He hunted Jedi remnants across the stars, not because they were a threat, but because each kill felt like slicing away another piece of the man beneath the mask. He thought if he destroyed them all, he might finally forget who he had been. But then, he heard a name, a new name, Luke Skywalker. A boy, a pilot, a spark too small to matter. And yet, he had destroyed the Death Star. Vader watched the footage, again and again. Not the explosion, the face, the fire in the eyes, something familiar. He said nothing to the Emperor, not yet, because he felt it before he understood it. This one is mine. He did not know why, not until later, not until the Force showed him. A name he had, buried, Skywalker. It wasn't possible, but the Force does not ask permission. It reveals, and now it revealed a truth so heavy. It cracked even Vader's silence. His son lives. He told himself it was a threat, a mistake, a Jedi, but beneath the justifications, something stirred, not hope, not love, but recognition. And recognition is the beginning of unraveling. Still, he obeyed the Emperor. He set the trap. He pursued the boy. He sought to turn him. That was the mission. That was the plan. But when they met, truly met, for the first time, Vader hesitated. Just once, just a moment, when the boy held his saber high and called him murderer, something broke, and Vader said, Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father. Not with pride, but with pain. And when Luke refused, the truth screamed that it was a lie. Vader did not mock. He only said, "Search your feelings. You know it to be true." And the boy fell not from height, but from faith. He chose to leap into the void rather than join him, and Vader watched. He did not stop him, because for the first time in years, he was not certain what he wanted. The mask did not crack, but inside, the man once named Anakin breathed, not with lungs, but with memory, and far away, the Force stirred, not as storm, but as possibility, for the mask had not shattered, but it had shifted, and that was enough. Chapter 14. The fire beneath the ice. He told himself he felt nothing, that he had no past, no pain, no sun, but even frozen seas conceal volcanoes, and all it takes is a spark. Darth Vader returned to the Emperor in silence. The boy had escaped, fallen into cloud and storm, but Palpatine did not rage. He smiled. "So, the son of Skywalker lives." Vader said nothing. He could not speak that name in the Emperor's presence without betraying something beneath the steel. Palpatine's voice was soft, too soft. "He will come to you again. I have foreseen it." But what he did not say, what he never said, was what he had also seen. That the boy might turn Vader, that Anakin Skywalker, the man Palpatine had destroyed, might still breathe beneath the armor, and so the Emperor prepared. He twisted the galaxy harder. He reached for Ender, 4 fleets. For fear it all torch a trap, not for Luke, but for both Skywalkers. Meanwhile, Vader watched the stars, longer than usual. Often alone, the bridge crews did not question him. No one dared, but they felt it. A change. Not in orders, but in presence. There was weight in the silence now, and beneath it, a question. Who am I? He would never ask aloud, but the Force heard it, and it answered in flashes. A boy racing through Mos Espa, a Jedi weeping on Mustafar, a woman whispering through dying breath, "There is still good in him." He turned away from those visions. He had to, for he was Vader. He had chosen this, hadn't he? And yet, when he reached out through the Force, he felt Luke reaching back. Not with rage, not with fear, but with hope. It was unbearable. Hope was a language he no longer understood, so he resolved to end it once and for all. The second time they met, Luke did not strike immediately. He pleaded, "Come with me, let go of your hate." And Vader hesitated. He said what he was supposed to say, "It is too late for me, son." But even that line wavered. He called him son, not as bait, not as a tactic, as recognition and the fire. The one buried deep under frost and steel. Flickered. He tested the boy, provoked him, pushed him into fury, and for a moment, he succeeded. Luke's blade struck, and Vader felt it. Real pain, not physical, emotional, because the boy was becoming him. And in that moment, broken, defeated, breathing ragged, Vader saw a mirror, not a weapon, a reflection, and when Luke threw down his saber, refused to kill, declared, "I am a Jedi. Like my father before me," the ice cracked completely. It was not rebellion, it was forgiveness, and Vader did not know how to stand against that. The Emperor laughed. Electricity danced in his hands. He turned on the boy, not to torture, but to erase, and Vader watched as the one soul who had not screamed, now screamed for his life. "Father, please." And in that word, that unbearable word, the ice shattered, the fire rose, and the man inside the machine awoke. But he had no words, only action. He lifted the Emperor. He held lightning in his bones, and for the first time since Mustafar, he made a choice. Not from anger, not from fear, from love. He threw the Emperor into the abyss, and in doing so, he fell, not into death, but into truth. For fire burns, away lies, and the last lie was this, that he was ever truly lost. He was not, he was. Anakin again, if only for a moment, and the galaxy changed, not with war, but with forgiveness. Chapter 15. The light that returned without permission. Some lights are not kind. They do not arrive gently. They burst through darkness, like a memory refused too long. Not because they are wanted, but because they are needed. There was no celebration when he died, only breathing, ragged, shallow, fading. Luke knelt beside the broken body, not the monster, not the machine, the man, the father. Anakin Skywalker lay. Beneath scorched armor and ruptured breath, he was not majestic, not powerful, only human. Luke wanted to save him, to carry him out, to rebuild him. But Anakin shook his head. You already have. And for the first time in decades, he smiled. It did not last, but it was real. No storm, no throne, no prophecy, just a father and a son, together at the edge of death. Luke wept, not because Anakin died, but because he returned. Returned not as a Jedi, nor as a warrior, but as truth and the Force. Trembled, not with sorrow, but with recognition. Balance had not come, with temples, nor with sabers, nor with war. It had come with a choice. One choice made in love, made in pain, made in full awareness of its cost. The Death Star crumbled above end, or fire devoured steel, but Anakin had already gone. Luke burned his armor, beneath the trees, not as hatred, not as shame, as respect, not for the machine, but for the man he saw beneath it. And in the Force, the silence shifted. Yoda, Obi-Wan, and now Anakin, their voices returned, not as echoes, but as presence, and the boy once abandoned to desert winds felt peace. The galaxy celebrated the fall of the Empire. Songs were sung, flags torn down, statues smashed, but the Force did not sing. It waited, for it had seen too much. It had seen heroes fall, seen darkness rise in hearts that once knew peace. It had seen empires born of hope, and rebellions fueled by vengeance. But now, for one moment, it was still, because the balance was not perfect, but it was possible, and the name once erased, now whispered through the Force again. Anakin, not as a warning, as a lesson, that even the lost may find themselves, that even the mask may crack, and even light may return. Without permission, without prophecy, without plan, just because it must. Chapter 16. The ghosts that refuse to fade the dead do not rest when their names still shape the living, and the Force never forgets its wounded. He was gone, and yet he wasn't. Anakin Skywalker, once slave, once Jedi, once Sith, had vanished into light, but the galaxy still felt him, not as myth, not as memory, as presence, in the shadow of the trees on Endor. As fires cooled and music rose, Luke saw him, not Vader, Anakin. Whole, silent, watching, and smiling, not with triumph, with peace, but ghosts in the Force do not come to be worshipped, they come to warn. Obi-Wan stood beside him. Yoda too, not aged, not broken, but beyond such things. They were not here to linger. They were here to witness, to remind the galaxy that what had passed was never the end. For the Force has no end. It loops, it bends, it remembers, and though had fallen, the shadows he cast remained in cold corners of the unknown regions. Dark cults whispered. In ruined systems, hatred festered beneath banners of peace, and the Force felt it, like an infection that had not yet finished its course. Balance had been restored, but balance is not stillness, it is tension, delicate, dangerous. The Jedi were gone, the Sith broken, and in their absence, something new would be born. Luke did not yet know what. He only knew that it could not be rebuilt from old stones. The temple was ash, the order was memory, and he, one boy with his father's eyes, now held the burden of beginning again. The ghosts did not speak, they did not instruct, they did not demand, they trusted, and in that trust, the Force offered something rare, a pause, not peace, not conclusion, but breath, because the wound had not healed. It never would, but it had stopped bleeding. That was enough for now. Elsewhere, far beyond celebration, far from light, broken remnants gathered, not to mourn, but to wait, because even as ghosts faded, their enemies did not, and somewhere in the cold, something ancient stirred again. But it did not rise in glory, it rose in secrecy, because darkness always returns in silence first. But the Force would not be surprised again. It had learned, it had watched a Skywalker fall, and now it had watched one rise. And so the ghosts did not fade. They watched, they waited, because one truth remained. The Force is never finished. Chapter 17. The shadow that tried to return darkness never dies. It recoils, it learns. And when the galaxy dares to sleep, it opens its eyes once more. The Emperor was gone, thrown into void, consumed by his own lightning, lost to legend. But Palpatine was not a man. He was a design, a will sharpened into doctrine, and even as his body burned, his vision did not. Far from Endor, far from stars that still remembered his name, the remnants stirred, fleets abandoned, commanders scattered, worlds fractured, but the echo remained. They whispered, "The Emperor is dead," but others asked, "What if he is not?" In dark corners, cults formed, not out of faith, but out of loyalty to shadow, acolytes in crimson, scientists without conscience, warriors born in vats, not to serve life, to defy death. The contingency had already begun, a plan written in ruin. If the Empire must die, then the galaxy would die with it. That was Palpatine's will, and wills can survive even the grave. From ancient observatories to hidden fortresses, instructions flickered, clones prepared, secrets sealed in carbon and code awakened. And somewhere in that void, a spark, not alive, not yet, but waiting. Meanwhile, Luke Skywalker searched not for enemies, for understanding. The Jedi path was gone, not failed, but finished. The old way had died with the temple. What remained was uncertain. He studied the Force with reverence and fear. He walked among ruins, spoke with ghosts, listened to the quiet between stars. But even he could feel it, a new darkness rising. It did not wear the face of Vader. It did not wield the hunger of Maul. It was colder, smarter, patient, because this shadow had learned Palpatine. Final teachings were not left in vaults. They were written in bloodline and in time. A child was born, not of love, not of accident, of purpose, created in secret, shaped by rituals, watched by a dying cult. A child meant not to lead, but to continue. Palpatine had failed in Anakin, failed to hold his apprentice, failed to chain the prophecy. Now he would become the prophecy. Through flesh he did not earn, through names he did not deserve. The shadow wore masks, the shadow wore crowns, but it did not carry the Force. It imitated it, twisted it, and when it finally rose, it called itself heir. But the Force does not recognize pretenders. It knows lineage, it knows truth, and it remembered the real bloodline. Luke, Leia, Leah, Ben, names that carried more than history. They carried possibility, and the shadows saw them as threats, because the spark of Anakin still glowed in them, and that fire could burn again. So the war would return, not as clone and droid, but as ideology. Against identity. The Empire was gone, but the Emperors will still breathed. And far above, forgotten worlds, a voice began to whisper once more, I have died before. Chapter 18. The flame that refused to die. Not all fire fades. Some descend into ash only to rise again, not as conquerors, but as memory. Lit by those who dared to carry the burden of hope. The galaxy spun, slower now. Scars across stars, worlds rebuilt, empires fallen, and yet not gone. Peace had returned in name, but beneath names, shadows stirred. The Jedi were myths again, stories told in twilight, whispers of temples, of sabers, of a boy who became machine and then man again. But stories do not save. People do. Luke Skywalker stood alone atop stone islands, wind carving lines into his face, silence into his soul. He had tried to build anew, tried to guide, tried to teach, but the fire flickered. Ben Solo, his blood, his student, had fallen, not to darkness, to confusion, to a legacy twisted by whispers, to an inheritance cursed by Palpatine's return. The Emperor, reborn in body, not born of love, but of design. He had cheated death, mocked prophecy, risen again, in the emptiness where the Force had once screamed. And now the final war had begun. Rey, daughter of no one, child of nowhere, rose to face him, not because she was chosen, but because she chose. In her hand, 2 sabers, the twin flames of Skywalker, Leia's strength, Luke's burden, and within her, a lineage not of heroes, but of monsters. She was Palpatine's heir, and yet she stood for the light, because destiny is not blood, it is decision. She faced the storm, endured the lightning, defied the throne, and when the Force offered her every crown, she chose silence, she chose truth, she chose to refuse. The Emperor died again, not by sword, by rejection, and as he vanished, so too did his hunger to possess what was never his. Rey fell, and in that fall, Ben rose, not as Kylo, not as Vader's mimic, but as himself. He gave his life for hers, and in that act, the Skywalker line, fractured and bloodied, found its echo. He died smiling as Anakin once had, and the Force balanced, not in temples, not in orders. In choice, Rey took the sabers, took the name, not to claim power, but to carry memory. Skywalker, the name no longer belonged to blood. It belonged to those who burned and still chose to shine, and the Force breathed. It was not at peace, it never would be, but it was aware that the fire, though scorched, still glowed in orphans. in wanderers, in those who would choose light without reward. The flame would not die, because someone always remembers, even if only in whispers, even if only in dreams, even if only in the Force. Thus ends the tale, not with triumph, not with tragedy, but with balance, and the echo of a name once spoken in fear, now carried in hope. Skywalker, may the Force remember, may the Force remember, may you remember. The holocron dims, the voice fades,